Well, I'm going to go ahead and get rolling. For those of you that may or may not know me, I may look a little bit different right now because of the silverback gorilla look, but Daniel Matheny. Um, I know I've kind of crossed paths with most everyone in the region, quite a bit here and there. I run Matheny Endurance. I have since about 2013. I've coached with CTS as a pro coach before that, and worked at USA Cycling. That's what brought me to Colorado Springs, originally from the Denver area and originally transplanted from Nashville. Longtime racer since 2002, I guess, or 2003 as a licensed pro, but raced collegiately, raced in high school as well. Not to the extent of what you guys have now, but that is kind of leads me to what I'm doing at currently and this passion. That's kind of just the gist of me. Kristen, that's also on the call, has graciously offered to help out with this program. I'll let her introduce herself and kind of explain a little bit. Awesome. And I just realized one thing. I need to switch off of my headphones here for a second. So the one thing I wanted to cover tonight was just kind of I was getting an overview of the programs, what the kind of mission was, the goals, things like that, just so everybody can kind of get a grasp from the ground up. There is a lot to be discovered because this is a new startup. There was a program that we ran in the springs prior, probably before Kristen was around with some of this stuff. But it was a summit program that was based out of an umbrella out of Utah. It was something that someone brought to me kind of the pre-COVID years, and myself and Jay Hakala, whose his son was Jaden Hakala, raced in the high school league as well. But they had an interest of basically starting something like this before. It's been a recurring theme. I've been here in Colorado since about 2006, and there hasn't been a good cohesive group, but that is very much more common in some of the other areas. There's, the Durango Devo that people have heard about that grows in riders from the ground up. Boulder Junior Cycling, Crested Butte, all these other cities and smaller communities have something like this, and it's not something that we really do. And so some parents and even some of the junior riders came to me originally when we kind of kicked off the Summit Devo, and it was very well accepted. We ran a few years, and the only reason it kind of faltered was the parent umbrella organization went into the red a little bit with some of their sponsors. They promoted a pro team, a U23 team, and they promoted some events, and they ended up just going into the red, even though we were doing great things here. At the end of our couple years, we had got some riders on some of the XC national podiums, transferred them onward to some development level teams, and that's been kind of my goal with this. Is it's very challenging for me. Like, I have a wife and two kids, and they're young, a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. So doing this takes a lot of extra work on my end, but it's something that I'm very passionate about because I didn't have this whenever I was a high school student or a junior racer, and wish I'd have known that pathway a little bit better. And the more I thought about it, the more I consulted with some other sports, some lacrosse teams, some soccer teams, things like that. Seems like cycling kind of has a little bit of a weird mix of how they approach some stuff. But with my experience of working as a collegiate high school manager at USA Cycling, I raced for a varsity cycling team in college. I founded a club team after that when I transferred to a university that didn't have it. Started to realize I had these kind of skills and knowledge base whenever I coach junior riders and sometimes work with their parents, that the recurring theme is taking the same conversation, whether it's the same year or year after year, of kind of explaining that process a little bit. And currently, like whenever I started working on this before, it was to kind of clean the pipeline up a little bit from what we have locally here and have with the talent pool and the riders, the high school program, stuff like that, and help them progress to get on that next level, whether they want to take it to the level of, say, a U23 team, or if they're maybe not at that level, just getting on a local or regional team, or if they're looking at going to the college level. So tying all these things together, and still currently I work with a lot of the team directors from across the U.S. We have like these about monthly calls or bi-monthly calls, essentially every couple months, where we go over the current state of affairs, talk about things and how to escalate things at like the championship races, whether they're cross country or gravity. And so I thought I was really positioned well to kind of offer something to the parents as well as the kids that are transitioning through the sport and kind of giving them a clear pathway. I have worked with the USA Cycling as a contractor for the last 5 years as the Talent ID head coach for our Rocky Mountain Regional Camp, and that's been very successful because it ties right in with some of the things that go with their mountain bike development program, and I think it's now called the Athlete Development Pathway, or ADP. It's kind of been rebranded over the years. We used to just call them Talent ID camps, so that's something where hopefully this process can shed some light on that, because it's not always the clearest path for parents or the kids as far as like what race series to go to, how to score points, what kind of things you need to be doing. But that said, the program itself is focused on developing a holistic rider, and that's on the bike, that's off the bike, hopefully to include some things that are essentially going to prepare you to be a lifelong athlete, maybe take it to that next level, but also to help you be just an overall, great human being, as well as the characters that help transfer into your schooling, your discipline, all that kind of stuff. Because I think as a coach of almost, probably dating myself now, over 20 years, I think that's some of the bigger pieces. There are some athletes that want to take it to that, nth degree, which I hope we can help with, but also setting somebody up for success in real life is a big piece of this as well. Does anybody have any questions about kind of what I just mentioned as far as like the background and the premise of the why behind this? And feel free to be interactive. If anybody's got any questions or anything like that, feel free to put them in the chat, or raise your hand, or just speak up. I'll kind of give some points to kind of open up the table. I've got some notes to kind of run through, just to cover the kind of nuts and bolts of the program, and some that were asked from people on the interim. So one was, is this a single program? My original scope of the program was just to offer something that wasn't being covered for the high school league, because there seemed to be a gap for what I consider like the normal season racing outside of the high school league, which falls in mostly like late summer into the fall. I know that some of the other programs are offering out of season, or what's considered club programming, that wasn't originally offered several years ago, with the league requirements of not being able to practice outside of season. But I know that's being offered. But I wanted to offer it a little bit more of a select group, basically people that are interested in taking it to the next level, that want to have coaching included, that want to have a little bit more discipline in those things. So it is a single program, but it's also started to basically blossom a little bit. So as I started going down this path, Kristen and I started working together, and also the other people engaged in the community, namely Jason Measy from Routes Outfitters, as well as Drew Cavan, whose son I rode with as part of the Highlanders in the last couple years. It started being apparent that there was a partial need here, besides what I consider just like the XCO racing or the cross country Olympic, but also more towards the gravity side of things. So the programs we're looking at offering are kind of threefold. One is the primary kind of peak Devo is a cross country oriented, or preparing riders to kind of be on their A game for going to the races that will qualify them to race at, say, UCI qualifiers, national championships, those kinds of things. Because national championships for cross country and gravity are in July, and they kind of jump around a little bit. This year they're in Pennsylvania. They've been in Winter Park the last few years. But essentially, that was my goal, was to fill a void from the springtime all the way until summer with a natural break, so riders could have a little decompression developmentally, a little mental and physical break before they go into the high school league. But as this model started to blossom a little bit, we thought about offering some conditioning and some team aspect things, because there were some riders that were just joining, say, the high school stuff or other smaller programs, say the Front Rangers or stuff like that. Even though they wanted to focus more on some of the, say, enduro or gravity-oriented stuff. Myself, as you can see in the background, I have like I've endurance basically, but that doesn't mean that I don't like to get rowdy on the descents too. So, um, frankly, at nationals this year, I've podiumed on the enduro and didn't podium in the endurance. So, I like the fun stuff going down just as much. And I think from my experience of having pro downhill roommates in college and that kind of stuff, you have to be just as fit to ride the gravity stuff, and more so than a lot of people think, as well as the endurance racers need to have the skills to descend, because if there's A lines in some of these UCI races and the more technical the XCO races get, if you're not efficient descending, then you can't just survive off of the pure fitness. So I think those go hand in hand, and that's where we started basically kind of spitballing the idea of having a supplemental gravity program that will be on our side a smaller scale that will transition more into what's considered like the routes gravity. So this is an umbrella program that we're basically getting rolling here that will involve cross country programming as well as gravity programming, and those can overlap. So if you want to do some days of the, like say, gravity practice, then that will be a separate day, and then there will be days, different day of the week, that will be more of the endurance focused days. So you can do both if you choose, or you can actually just do one or the other. And the way we wanted to set it up was multiple entry points. So I kind of termed it that's something specific to our world, which is like kind of the base phase. So that's kind of getting ready soon now in the springtime, which would be our program from March until May. And then that is basically about a 9-week window where there will be what I deem is a little bit more fun events that we're focused on. There's a couple team events that are 6 and 12 hours down at the Royal Gorge. There's the 17 and 34 mile kind of lapping race that's also down there that offers the opportunity to do duo category and stuff like that, as well as a couple XC distance races. The second program is what I call the race phase, or more the summer program. It starts up immediately after that, basically in mid-May, and goes from mid-May all the way until July when national championships hits. Unfortunately, they just moved Colorado State Championships 2 weeks later because national championships was put on top of that date. They didn't know when it was when they scheduled it, but that's the idea. Is the first programming is set to be a little bit more developmentally friendly, and kind of work on building up the general fitness and a little bit more fun aspect of the races. And then the second program is a little bit more intense as far as like focused on the cross country races, where it's solo lineup and categories, and kind of get that final phase ready for the national championships, or what I consider the regular USAC racing. The races that we focused on in that second block are more local events, but it doesn't mean that we can't send other riders to, say, somewhat of the national scene. And there are some of those races, whether it be the Soldier Hollow Bike Fest, there's Fayetteville in Arkansas, there's Sea Otter, there's a lot of different races. I think there's even Missoula, Montana. There's several of these races that are basically UCI races and things like that that are somewhat of a necessity to go to and get points if you're wanting to kind of start that progression and work up those ranks. It is not by any means required, and that's not something where we're going to be traveling to all of those as a team. I personally can't commit to that with young kids, but essentially what we're focusing on here is getting kind of buffering the edge off of getting that race experience, having fun, doing it together, having support, so everybody can go to those bigger events if they want and not feel like they're towing the line for the first time and at a competitive high caliber event. Does anybody have any questions about kind of running through the different programming so far? All right. Um, the One of the main questions was like, we sent out an application or an intent, and now we are basically going to open up for registration. With the intent of this being more of a select program, this was intended to be uh, naturally narrowing down, kind of natural selection, by the intent of having to apply, having to go through that process. We wanted to make it a little bit selective to make sure that you are serious as a rider and you want to take it to that next level. You may or not be on the fence with that regards, but my intent was to make the first programming, the base program, a little bit less selective and more open-ended. We were going to probably select and be more selective if we got a ton of applicants, but I kind of want to make sure that anybody that gets in, as long as they're somewhat capable, can get their foot in the foot in and basically kind of test the water for the base phase and possibly make the next program a little bit more selective. So our base program that's going to start in a couple weeks here is going to be weekly practices. We're not going to have a true tryouts for this first one. We will have somewhat of a baseline, which is almost going to be the same, pending trail conditions. That's the one caveat right now, because we keep getting repeated snowstorms and stuff like that. And that's why my original program that we did before started in February, and I thought it was way too early. So this one's starting with March, specifically after the time change next week, on purpose, so we can actually have daylight after school, not be too crunched. We know that Colorado Springs aren't that friendly. Sometimes, April and May, or sometimes we're getting the snowstorms more than we want, but we're going to try to work around that. And that's why in the info form, when you filled out that document, that it said, we will practice during the week with some flexibility. We will try to make those as much as possible, but pending the weather, we have to kind of heed to Mother Nature and also not ruin our trails. So with that, the first one, we will probably do a kickoff baselining, which will be some type of mini field test. And don't think I'm going to go hammer a pie drive. That's not what I'm thinking of, because with this being what I call a downcountry kind of premise, is we want it to be a little bit of technical skill oriented as well as the fitness component, and we're not expecting everybody to be on peak form in March, nor would I want anybody to be. The thing is, with me, with testing or with even doing a little mini mock race or something like that, it's to set a baseline, because what you can measure can then be monitored and manipulated. And then we can see how you're doing as we progress, even as we go into the later weeks of practice, or even the next phase of the race programming in the summer. Any questions on that kind of stuff? Okay, we got a quiet group here. Um, yeah, tentatively right now, what I was gonna pitch was basically uh, work on Mondays be the enduro day, and Tuesdays be the cross country day. So we would have basically the option for the Mondays would be a somewhat of a more what I call earn it to burn it day, basically more of a chill pedal, and trying to get some gravity on the downhill side, so not so much focused on the fitness aspect. And then the second day programming, more continuous stuff to start off, basically just endurance rides, and then working more towards some specific fitness goals with maybe some intervals or somewhat of hot laps, where it's a little bit more focused on the fitness aspect for the endurance programming. Yeah, practices. Very good question, Mike. That the practices, the question there was, are they going to move around? So typically we can have them just about anywhere. I typically like to rotate around different parks, kind of within the Colorado Springs region, and that's what I put on there. So we can go anywhere from Cheyenne Canyon to Red Rocks to Stratton to Palmer Park to Ute Valley to Pulpit, sometimes up north to Air Force, and even up to Mount Herman area. So most of the cross country stuff will be at the primary parks, I guess, and the trail systems. If we have to get a little bit more on the gravity side, that kind of lends to what we can have access to, depending on trail conditions and weather. Good question. Um, I can go through. One of the main questions was regarding registrations, the fees, those kinds of things. So I'll cover those kind of next. When is registration due? Since we're allowing different access points and entry points, registration for the spring programming will basically be starting in March. So basically March 13th will be the registration for the base, or that first set of programming that's going to last from March till May. And then we will have another registration that's going to start in May for the May through July timeframe. There will be an option to register for both at a discount, as well as if you want to do supplemental gravity with the endurance and you want to practice a couple days a week. It's not 100% sure. I've got to work with Drew and Jason a little bit more on when they want to do specifically on that gravity programming, and it kind of depends on who registers for what when we schedule those days. So with it being an application or a select team, without having confirmed registrations yet, I'm not sure who's doing exactly what. So once we get that stuff in, then we'll be able to sort those in and have those days set. The registration fees, these include a whole laundry list of things. Did anybody actually look at the flyer or the info at the top of the stuff before we started? Because I'll run through those just so everybody kind of has it. Sorry, I'm looking over at my other screen to go through the document here. So just so we can kind of run through what's included, what's not, all that stuff with the registration. So basically, each program is about 9 weeks long and includes those 9 weekly practices. There is an option for additional what we consider like adventure rides or weekend rides that will be scheduled maybe outside of the races. We will have 3 team events with each phase of that, and that's kind of based on what we have limited access to. There's not much more than that. The first base phase, we may have an option to do a couple. The 3 events we were looking at for that one were April 1st is the Lakewood, in Lakewood, Colorado, called the Bear. It's a Rattler racing event. There's one at the end of April. The Fandango race is no longer in Bailey, Colorado, where it was for state champs last year. They moved it to the MAC in Castle Rock, which is actually close, but it's not the same course. And then the 2 fun events, like I mentioned, there's the Royal Gorge Groove in April. That's down in Royal Gorge, obviously. It's a 17-mile and 34-mile option for a single or double lap, and you can do that as like solo or duo. That's one of those that's considered as a fun event. The second one was the 6 and 12 hour on May 13th of the Royal Gorge, promoted by Zia Rides. That's another team event. The other things that are included with this are going to be a virtual team sponsorship seminar. So this is where I will go through the process of outlining the course of action for students and parents to take it to the next level. So this is in topics that are going the U23 team versus a kind of a development team, how to connect with those team directors, that kind of stuff. Taking it to the varsity or club level at the college level, what the team application process looks like, what teams are looking for, even what directors are looking for, and even getting that process going. So kind of a little bit of education. That will be like a recorded process that will go out to everybody. Also included with that is a one-on-one with me, with your parent and athlete, to go over that future as well. So not only is it just a general, this is what most people should do, but how can we direct this? Do you need something as far as a referral letter, some type of introduction, how to look for these things if you're looking for the next level? I expect these to be kind of on the junior, senior level or senior age range, to kind of give them the information to go that next thing. As far as what's included or not included, like travel, lodging, food, and chaperoning, these are the responsibilities of most of the parents or the athletes, depending on if you can drive or not. You're not required, like parents aren't required to be at each practice, but just remain at, in case of emergency, just to be available from that standpoint. And if you have to arrange something with another athlete that's on the team or something like that, or another parent, that's kind of like getting to those events, because as the coaching staff and those kinds of things, there are some like safe sport regulations and things like that we have to be cautious of like traveling with student athletes and things like that. So those are some things that are not included. So the team cost is basically like $1,400 and plus a team kit. And since it is a select team, we won't be able to order those until we get the registrations in, and we will actually get those in the process. So the base program will probably get them at the end of closer to the end of the programming, but that will be in time for some of the races. And then the supplemental gravity program, I won't disclose that completely until I meet a little bit more with Drew and Jason with the routes team, but it was going to be basically offered in that only the spring base phase. until they get their programming set up and running to kind of transition to doing more things at like trestle gravity and traveling to some of those events once the mountains are fully open on the deep mountain side. The the um, race information or the race program offers a little bit more of a different race progression. One of them is the Mad Gravel Cross Country, which happens in Elbert, Colorado, and that's at the end of May. And then State Champs is going to be in Copper Mountain in July. There's not many cross country races on the calendar currently for that race phase, so there's some options to possibly go to some like Firecracker 50 as a duo or something like that that are actually going to be a little bit cross country, but a little bit as a makeshift to kind of fill that void a little bit. Um, so from the standpoint of that, any questions on the programming side? Yeah, yeah. So basically, each program is a separate fee because everything is included. So that's a good question. And those are separate because the race entries, I've already contacted each race promoter and have our entries basically kind of in the pipeline to go in as a team. So we can just basically take care of everything. So once we show up racing as a team, setting everything up as a team and basically doing that as a whole. So it's kind of like going to a tournament altogether. Um, and if you do multiple ones, we're planning on offering a discount, like basically like jump in and you basically get a discount on those. And then if you don't have to get kits for each one of those, obviously like you're not required to do that twice if you're kind of get it with the first one or the second one. So yeah, and that's another thing as well that's kind of important with that is um, the way it kind of works with having the tryouts, the team. We're working on creating this recognition and identity to have the experience working with not only like myself as a pro coach and kind of long-time pro racer, but also to have that experience of like say um, being stronger as a unit together. So with that, like having a team tent, all that stuff, it's great to be together on the scene, but partially it's actually getting that experience along the side with other people trying to take it to that next level and creating that. So the other thing is like the entry and everything with the registration um, includes all this, but what we're working on is making it sustainable to where it's not responsible by sponsors only, because that is what happened with several programs that I've seen in the past, and not just the summit team that I worked with, was if it's solely relying on sponsors and any of those kind of falter, then the program is very at risk for not being able to continue. So working on it with a program, but that doesn't mean we're not working on that. So one that I've already secured is Competitive Cyclist, which is obviously that you guys are probably familiar with a large online presence. They have a lot of everything. That doesn't mean I'm wanting to kind of go away from our local bike shops. I definitely want to support those, but when it comes to what local bike shops can stock, it's you can only get so much. And the great thing with these guys is they're willing to support us with, they've got their what's called gearheads. It's not only competitive cyclists, but it's like their backcountry outdoor thing. So they can get us pretty much anything we need very quickly with a very liberal return policy and all that kind of stuff if things aren't fitting or if you need something that does work, as well as they've offered to support us with some other things that are like above and beyond for kind of like freebies to do some challenges, some pretty big perks that would be awesome because they want to support what we're doing. We're working on some other ones, but we have to have a little bit of an establishment before we can actually get that, with it being a new kickoff. So I've talked with Stram here in town. They're definitely kind of on board, as well as some other people. But with that, it's not something we have all that steam. And that's why we're wanting to operate with without the need for sponsors first and foremost, so that you guys have a sustainable program and get that support you need. Um, the other thing that I forgot that was mentioned that I didn't mention was also, besides just the practices, is myself, Matheny Endurance, is going to provide a coaching plan that the team can be on as a group, that is kind of tailored around our season and kind of the progression through spring and summer. That is basically the training plan outside of just our practices. So instead of it just being the way it was I worked with in the past, was not knowing exactly what everyone was doing. Now at least you can be on the same page to say these are going to be the days that I say do a workout. These are going to be the rest days. These are going to be our race days, that kind of stuff. So you can have that plan. That is something that I do for athletes that I coach day in and day out. And having somewhat of that guidance on the team, then everybody gets that, to kind of make sure that they're on somewhat of a steady progression and steady track. Um, any other questions so far? No, no, no. All right. Um, so a few more notes that I had here. So one of the questions was somewhat, is this a team? And that may sound somewhat kind of weird, but yes, kind of, but also it's more focused, like I said, on the programming side of things. So we do want to create that identity as a team, obviously with the kit and everything. But like I mentioned originally, with the program being from March to July, the intent isn't to necessarily consume the entire year, because there's times when you may represent, say, your high school team. There may be times that I would like for the person or the rider to get on to another team at a development level. And so I didn't want to be exclusive to say, well, this person is racing for another team, you can't come to our programming. So yes, if you would like to identify with our program, hopefully we create that strong brand and that kind of exceptional production and outcome, that you want to be involved. But it doesn't necessarily need to be exclusive to where you can't, basically graduate on. This is something as a coach I've had to deal with personally, where it's like work with an athlete for 4 or 5 years, and then all of a sudden they get on a well-renowned team, and then I have to pass them off to, their team director, their team coaches, that kind of stuff, where they travel. And it's like, it's a blessing and a curse, because it's like a lot of work went into it, but that's the best thing for that rider, and I have to make sure that they continue down that path. So yes, it is a team, but it's not necessarily only that. The programming can be for anybody, and I think it will better prepare everyone for, the summer racing, the NICA season, or I guess it's more of like the high school season, since it's not exclusively NICA anymore. So hopefully that gives an idea of the exact basis behind it. Any other questions? And I'll check the chat here too. So I think Alex had some questions. The first practice will be let me pull up my calendar real quick. Would be the week after. Sorry, my calendar is not populating at the moment. Yeah, the first practice would be the week of the 20th. And while I've got everybody's attention on that, does anybody have any request for, like, what practice days? I originally was basically aiming towards early in the week, because I knew that some of the other programs were starting to do things as well, and I didn't want as many conflicts. But would those Mondays and Tuesdays work as far as practice goes? Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I started getting some insight as I checked with some of the high school coaches and directors and stuff like that. And so it's maybe a little bit flexible because it seems like some of the people started doing that. I don't want to necessarily program around them, but obviously being cognizant of that I think is important. So I'm not I don't have it set in stone as far as like if we're going to do which day on which as far as like the gravity component. And like I said, it kind of depends on the number of registrations. Basically, I left Monday through Wednesday open, knowing that those were going to be time frames to kind of set the programming and make sure to have practice. And obviously, like with a little bit of weather options and things like that, I wanted to have some flexibility to do that as well. So um, that's about the gist of the notes as far as what I wanted to cover. Were there any other? I wanted to leave some definite some time for some Q&A and stuff like that. So the number of athletes we have that expressed so far has been about 16. Hmm. Yeah, great question, Alex. Uh, so which races you go to is completely up to each individual and their family. Like no, as far as those races, nothing is required by any means. We would like to have a strong attendance because making that presence and actually getting each athlete their race experience, I think, is part of that because I feel like the more you um, kind of toe the line and get on that earlier, the more experience you'll have and more comfortable it'll be. And you start kind of developing a sense of race preparedness and awareness. So, as far as like prioritizing things, most of the early season base things are for the fun aspect. And I think that's a big piece of it, whether you're taking it to that level of like, wanting to take it to a U23 team or, really high level racer, making sure it's fun is kind of the biggest piece of it. And so whenever people start taking it to the extreme of like, I've got to do this and it's really like rigid, I don't think that's good on anyone. So my take on the coaching aspect and kind of like what events to go to is not forcing it on the schedule, even if it's like a stress on the family or the individual that's actually towing the line. If they can make it to some of them, that's great. If they have to miss all of them, then that's actually like, unfortunate. And I wouldn't recommend that. It may not be the best programming if that's the case, but the more chances you can get to experience the race, the better because it kind of just gets you more accustomed to being in that scenario. Yeah, yeah. We're with the registration fee and everything. That's what we were planning on doing. Was we were going to take care of all the registrations, and I've worked that out with each promoter already to basically register our team. So the part of our registration process with the Peak Devo is going to be getting all what I consider like each individual's vitals, so we can actually like have them ready to rock, and we show up and take care of that. I've kind of my intent with this was actually to streamline the process a little bit because I know a lot of parents and a lot of kids do it, but not every scenario is the same, and kind of lowering that bar of take as much of the anxiety or like the angst off of it as possible and treat athletes like somewhat of being like a little bit of a pro, and not necessarily like coddle them, but essentially like take it seriously, know what it feels like to have like a support crew and a background behind you, and kind of get some wind in the sails for that confidence behind it. With traveling with other kind of big teams, whenever that team directors pick up and do all your stuff for you, is kind of a unique experience. And wanting to take that off of the parents of like, when are registrations possible, when do they need to be getting that stuff in, so we can just basically go and pick up our whole team's registration and be there together as a unit. Thanks. Yeah, very good point. Sometimes it's like I'm not the best on the team app. I think we use Team Snap for the high school programs I was working with, so this is a little slightly different platform, but there's so much stuff in there as far as information, and I know you can kind of skimp on it, but some of that, like Kristen said, is very important. So if you can go in there and make sure your full profile is complete, that will allow us. There may be a few things that I need to kind of reach out for everybody for to make sure that we can capture everybody's information and go to those events and make it streamlined as possible. Yeah. One of the things that, like I mentioned, was being connected with some other teams that are across the U.S., and we have these ongoing kind of like directors calls and things like that. So my intent was to have this program be a regional kind of program that escalates up. And so, like, I've already worked with like Julia Volich from Bear Devo, which is a predominantly kind of strong, very strong junior and U23 team. Um, Over the last couple of years when we were considering launching this before, to have somewhat of what we consider a recognition when we go to those, because what I see as a benefit when you start going to these larger races is to have somebody to kind of pull you under your wing a little bit and be recognized. Because if you show up, like I said, is this a team or is this programming? I wanted it to have that team aspect to where when you go somewhere else, you can kind of be recognized and helped out with something. So part of my intent was not that I can travel to a lot of the big national races, is to somewhat have an introduction to say, which races are you wanting to go to? Let's see if we can make an introduction and get you like basically rooming with some of these other programs, because a lot of times they secure large condos, that kind of thing. Um, we would have to know that information and like as far in advance as possible, and that's where it's like letting us know, because we can escalate that up to those other programs and say, hey, we've got another rider here. Can they kind of get in with your squad? And that way you have some other riders of the same age to kind of go pre-ride with and connect with their team directors and stuff like that, and basically share the load with. Kind of depends on if you're traveling with a parent or if you're just going on your own, but that's kind of the intent, is to have somewhat of an introduction so you're not just rolling up solo at these bigger events. Usually as much as possible, because once some of the races are kind of promoted and basically put on the schedule, people start snatching up lodging and accommodations and stuff like that. So if anybody's wanting to take it to those bigger events, I would say the spring ones are pretty limited. But with that, it's like say Sea Otter and some of those very early season ones that are in the next couple months. Those would be more challenging to get to, but it's like we may still have some opportunities for that the summer racing a little bit more of like the late May into June through July. Um, yeah, that's to be determined, I guess. It is a long haul from that standpoint. Kind of depends on. I'm not opposed. Like my wife's family is from upstate New York, and it's only a few hours from there. But um, uh, as far as the travel to nationals goes, I would like for the to get interest from the group first, and then see how many we have wanting to go. Because if we have enough interest, then it may be more worthwhile to actually head to that event, and have some support. We just need to jump on it as far as like how much accommodations, how much things like that we need. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so that's okay. Yeah, yeah. I wanted to be respectful of everyone's time as well. I didn't want to run too long, so I wanted to make sure to keep it pretty concise. So the next steps that I see, we will be sending out a registration link. We will be announcing kind of that first practice location and kind of going from there with our base phase. So I know that from the intent forms, we've got a mix of like people that were interested in the base program, the race program, which are the difference between May and March and May, as well as some of the gravity interest. So when we send this out, we basically have those registration options for starting up the programming from that standpoint, and it will kind of depending on who all registers will be kind of how the groups play out and things like that. So I'm excited to kick this off. It's been something where everybody's been very enthusiastic about the process, and it's a lot of work on my end, but it's something that I wish I would have had whenever I was getting my feet wet in the racing scene. Yeah, yeah. I would say like if you are interested in doing the race only, then I would say like just doing that, like getting in on the kit order or at least getting sizes so we can get that in the mix for the early one. Because if we wait until that next phase, then the kits will probably be a little bit late for the any much racing the way it takes. Because I've done lots of kit orders over the years, and it's one of those things where especially when you get into the summer months, like the turnaround isn't as quick. Even right now, it's a little bit delayed because it's like peak spring season for getting that stuff. So good question. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a good question, Sam. Um, I would say since if you're wanting to do that, and that's kind of why we were offering the kind of conditioning gravity component was for the more of the gravity racers to get kind of up and running in that base phase, but not necessarily be pushed. Because the way I see it is like, I've got a 160 mil travel bike sitting back here. If I go and ride that on practices where it's a bunch of cross country guys, it's going to be me flogging the donkey for 10 minutes up every climb, but then partying on the way down, and just vice versa. So the way we started working with it was if there's a conditioning component, which is the gravity side, then everybody's primarily on the same rigs and on the same like more level playing field. So not necessarily is it going to be the programming of the base phase for the gravity and endurance isn't going to be much different per se, besides maybe the routes and just the overall pace. Because my take on the gravity side of things is the training is somewhat very similar. It's just the continuity of the rides and things like that. It's not like it shouldn't be a lot of stop and go and like, pedal hard to the top and then wait for 10 minutes and then descend and stuff like that. It's more continuous. So that was my intent with the conditioning side of the gravity. But if you were interested in doing the endurance thing as well, then yeah, we could probably talk about basically taking the races, reducing them out of there. As a coach, I still think doing some of the team events, especially like the 6 and 12 hour, even though it sounds like maybe that's not the gravity side of things, but I know whenever I'm personally very fit for cross country, I can do much better in the gravity side, especially enduro, because it's you got to be able to still turn over that energy and produce that power. So I would say some of those races in the base phase would actually suit you for preparing, especially like that 6 and 12 hour, because if you can do repetitive laps, it's kind of like enduro racing where you have to kind of transfer and get different points of a race course. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and we can definitely discuss that, either some type of discount or some type of refund. But I think probably be leaning towards just more of like the gravity programming, where it's just like the gravity programming. Why it was going to be a reduced cost was because it wasn't going to include the the races. Obviously, most of the gravity races are later in the year when we can have access to the full big mountains and lift serve and stuff like that. So that's why it was just going to be a scaled down, basically weekly practice and rides more so than a lot of the other stuff, because there weren't a lot of races we could go to. But there will be a little bit more info to come from Jason from Routes and Drew helping out with some of that, spearheading the gravity side of things, that will transition from that conditioning phase of the base program on into more of a full blown gravity component. Any other questions? Oh,
like mid-May. Trestle usually opens like mid-June, so we're talking about a program where we get riders up to Trestle on a weekly basis, and that includes sort of just turning laps at the bike park, some elements of skills coaching and whatnot, and then we haven't really hammered out the races that would be supported, but there's a handful of downhill races throughout the summer, and there's a good amount of and there's a lot there's actually a really good amount, a solid amount of enduro races that um, what was Routes Gravity will be sort of a sister program to the Peak Devo endurance program. That's kind of what we're thinking.
very good.
And Daniel, I think with the registration interest that you've had, we'll coordinate in getting info out on that as soon as we kind of hash it all out.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, very good.
You're still muted, Daniel.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was muted there. Yeah, that looks good. Thanks for the little touch on that. And that's where, like what Drew mentioned on, is like the original intent of the program was just focused on the kind of cross country side of things, but it is blossoming and growing. And one of the things we're working on it with this is that, creating a nonprofit with an organization that has a lifespan beyond what we're creating here, hopefully. So being part of something bigger as it founds now. Yeah, if I think we're approaching about the hour mark. If nobody has any other questions, I want to just say appreciate your time, appreciate your interest. If there's any follow up questions, don't hesitate to send a message on the team app, or I think I emailed everybody directly as well. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm as responsive as I can, and then. Look forward to working with everybody in the coming weeks. We'll be getting the information out to you for registration. So, thank you everyone for the time.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank
Paul's
you.
going to end.
Thank
So
you.
thank you.
Have a good night.